Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Rabbi Eric Walker. Whether you became a single parent through divorce, a death, adoption, or some other situation, and you've probably wondered what the future holds for you and your children. Will you be able to provide the emotional, financial, and spiritual support your family needs? In her new book, The Single Parent, our next guest will encourage you and help you avert problems before they arise. It's filled with wise counsel, biblical truth, and real-life stories, the author's own as well as those of many single moms and dads who have come across her path over the years. You'll find tips and best practices to help you improve your child's behavior, negotiate boundaries, graciously seek and accept help from others, and, most importantly, trust God in the process. God cares for the single parent and will provide for you and your children. Let this book give you the tools you need as you travel this road with Him. Linda Ranson Jacobs is one of the foremost leaders in single parent ministry. Having been both divorced and widowed, Linda knows firsthand the emotional and support needs of single parent families and has a passion to help hurting families. As a children's ministry director, speaker, trainer, and therapeutic child care center owner, Linda has assisted countless single-parent families and their children. In 2004, Linda created and developed the Divorce Care for Kids program, a ministry tool designed to bring healing, comfort, coping, and communication skills to children of divorce. Linda lives with her husband in Navarre, Florida. Here to discuss her new book, The Single Parent, Confident and Successful, is Linda Jacobs. Linda, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you so much. I am glad to be here. Thank you.
Well, glad to have you here. My daughter is right down the road from you at Fort Walton Beach at the Women's Center, where she just delivered my granddaughter, and she's just down the road from you.
Very, very close, probably just about 15 miles from me.
There you go. Great. Well, it's great to meet you. It's a topic that it's interesting. There's many books written on divorce and divorce recovery. There's many books, how to start over again. But resources for single parents seems to be, they're classified, they're not necessarily embraced. Oftentimes they wind up either losing some of their identity or taking the route of homeschool because they find a little bit more acceptance and interaction there, and that's not a two-parent kind of activity. That's more of a one-parent and getting into a homeschool parenting group of moms, and so it becomes kind of a mom's thing. And then we don't really address the single dad scenario at all. That's just such an anomaly that we don't even address it. It's there, but it's that hush word of this season, like divorce and cancer were of prior seasons. That you said it at a whisper. He's a single dad. Bless his heart. So I kind of want to not start in the middle. I want to start at the beginning. And that's take you back to your childhood, to the kind of home that you were raised in, where you learned your life lessons, your faith lessons, your parenting lessons, and your coping skills.
Well, I was very fortunate. I had a strong Christian family, and both of my parents wanted all of us to be independent. So it was back in the 50s, and it was a typical two-parent home, went to church on Sunday. But more than that, more than teaching us biblical standards, they really taught us. My dad owned his own business, and they taught us to be independent, to think for ourselves early on. So I think probably I was very blessed then when I became a single mom, because I reverted to how my parents had raised me. Now, a lot of people, when they become single parents, they have to do what we call a transition. So they are raised in a two-parent home. They have to learn how to single parent. For me, it came relatively easily. My ex-husband had traveled a lot, so I mostly was raising my children alone. He would be gone for several months at a time, several weeks at a time. So I had a good relationship with my children. So I grew up in this 50s dynamic that we don't even see anymore. Got a job early on, worked my way, saved my money so I could go to college. Graduated from college. My husband was in the military, moved to San Diego, learned a lot of life lessons in San Diego. So
That's
that was really
interesting.
my early life.
Well, my daughter was born at Fallbrook Hospital, so that's right around the corner from San Diego. So there's a lot of parallels and connections there. So as you began to face the prospect of becoming a single parent, this isn't something that it just happens. You're headed down a path, and in your case, this was divorce that happened to you in this first marriage.
I
You,
didn't believe in divorce, and I didn't want to be divorced, and I fought it the whole way. Refused to even go to court. But in some states, it only takes one person to get a divorce now, and they go to court and say, "I want a divorce," and you don't even have to sign the divorce papers, and you end up divorced. And a lot of people don't realize that. So yeah, I didn't want a divorce. Happened, and I was really overwrought. I wasn't even a parent for several months because I just was in shock.
how old were your children at this time?
My children were 7 and 11 the first time he moved out. And, you know, we didn't really have good counseling back in 1985, is when it first started. The divorce had just become rampant, after Governor Ronald Reagan signed the no-fault divorce. And so divorce was a thing at the time, I guess you might call it. But there wasn't much church guidance. There wasn't really much counseling to help you survive that time. So there was nothing for the children. I searched everything. And of course, we didn't have internet or anything at the time, but I searched and searched, and there was just nothing to help me help my children. And I was running a therapeutic childcare. We had a lot of kids that had out of control behaviors, and we accommodated them very well. We had a good reputation with the licensing, with the state, with our schools that we worked with. And I began to look around at all these children that had so much out of control behavior. Now, this is not saying every child of divorce does, but in my child care, I realized, whoa, many of these kids are coming from a single parent home or a divorced home. And I really began to feel that that was a lot of the problem. So I just started doing a lot of research. We started doing a lot of experimenting in our child care. And that's really how I got into knowing how to work with my own children, was what we did in our child care with these kids. And we mothered them. We were Christian mothers, and we did things differently than what licensing expected us to do. They were always coming out and going, "Oh, Linda, I can't believe you guys come up with so many good ideas." Therapists would come into our program and say, "Wow, how did you figure this out?" Or they would call us. One therapist kept calling and go, "Okay, what'd you do with Josh this week? Because you live with him and I get more ideas from you. I can pass on to my other clients." So I had a fantastic staff. I had a on-site counselor, and that's how we just became adaptive in our child care to accommodate all these children.
So let me understand, you started out of the single parentedness, you started a center, a daycare center?
I had a daycare center
Oh, you
already.
had a daycare center. All right. Okay. So
Yeah,
this was your.
we went from just being a regular child care, preschool, kindergarten to a therapeutic program.
I see. And so was this a therapeutic for just children of single parents, or was
It
this?
was it was for everyone, but the majority of the children were from single parent homes. And that's what I discovered, is that, and now we have a lot of research. I'm sure you're familiar with the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and now they're finally figuring out what we knew years ago, back in the 80s, that trauma leads these children, it affects their behavior. So that's how I really got into studying and working with therapists and counselors to know how to work with these children. Because nobody was working. They were just diagnosing them and putting them on medications, which, some of them are ADHD, but many of them were misdiagnosed back then.
Did you find that there was a correlation that when there was a behavioral issue with a child, that contributed to the divorce scenario. One parent more overwhelmed by the fact that parenting became something that was too challenging, too demanding, there were too many problems, there were too many issues. There wasn't I didn't sign up for this. I didn't grow up in a family that had lots of conflicts and lots of problems, and we seem to have all these conflicts and problems, and so it's not me, it must be you, and I'm walking out the door.
Well, that's a lot. That was it a lot of times, and you have to remember, divorce was just talked about a lot in the 80s and early 90s. Now we don't have it talked about so much because people are just cohabitating. But back then, people had made a commitment to marry, and for whatever reason, things became stressful. The economy, just different things, and I didn't sign up for this. We had two. Most of the parents were two-parent families, so there's a lot of stress when they got home in the evenings. His job, her job, who was going to do the dishes, who was going to bathe the children. Just a lot of conflict was going on in the homes.
So it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. There's conflict in the home. Is that going to contribute to the behavior of the children, or does the behavior of the children contribute to the conflict in the home?
I think it's the conflict in the home that causes the child to be out of control. The conflict between the two adults is what affects the child so much. Rarely would the child's behavior affect. I had one situation where the child was adopted and he came to us at 6 weeks of age, and at 2 years of age, the family was on the verge of a divorce because the mother could not discipline the child. She loved him so much she couldn't discipline. And dad couldn't either. And so they came to me and we worked on some issues, and that brought their marriage back together. But that was rare. Usually it was the other way around.
I share an interesting story about my daughter and our time together as a single dad. Time out was the preferred method of discipline, and timeout was completely ineffective with her. She would sit in the
children.
Yeah, she would sit in the corner, and it became her virtual reality stage. And she would set the stage with characters, and the curtain would open, and she could visualize all this, and she'd be talking and having a great time, and it was absolutely no impact whatsoever on her. Timeout was nothing. It was like just another space to play in. But one day, I got very frustrated with the ineffectiveness of this timeout. I wasn't going to resort to corporal kind of punishment. So I decided that I was going to take her favorite doll, and I put it in timeout. Well, this flipped my daughter's switch. That got to her. She went and she sat in the corner with the doll, comforting the doll and explaining to the doll, now listen, Daddy is not mad at you. He's just upset with what you did. And you have to understand that there's responsibilities, and he gives you more responsibilities when he can trust you. But when you break those trusts, then the circle gets smaller and you wind up here. And so if you'll just learn that, this child, 5, 6 years old, is spouting off every concept of discipline and structure that I tried to teach her. She obviously got it. It just didn't apply to her, but it applied to the comfort that she needed to render to this doll. And so that became the only way I could reach her, was through something that was important to her.
But you probably were reaching her more than you realize, because what we've learned down through the years is time out is a great time away. And so many of these children just need a break. They need a time away. They need a break. They can calm themselves down. And your daughter did great. She had some tremendous coping skills if she was able to play act and do all that in time out. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I wanted her to be independent. I was raised to be independent. I left home very early, went off to college very early, and never returned back home. And so I'm a child of the early 50s as well. and that was just the way of life. When you decided to focus on the single parent resource area, this writing of a book, the vision to kind of put down on paper many of the concepts that you had developed over the years, much of the understanding and insight, so that you could become reach a broader audience. I found it very, very interesting that you opened the book with the thing that I think I contended with the most in the 7-year period was the loneliness.
Most parents, single parents, that is a huge issue. I do a lot of single parent retreats, and that's one of the questions I ask is, when are your loneliest moments? And you cannot, I think I put some of the answers in the book, but that is a huge issue for parenting. Before I was a single parent, my husband traveled a lot. So I would go to my daughter's concert in middle school, and I would sit there alone, but it was okay because I was a married parent. And I knew I'd go home and maybe he'd call and we'd talk about the kids. And I'd tell him what the concert was about, who was there, blah, 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 blah. Well, when I became a single parent, it was a totally different feeling. I would go to the concert and I was alone and I was lonely because I knew when I got home that night, there was nobody to talk to about what happened. There was no other parent. There was no intimate relationship where I could talk to somebody about this child that we had had. And so it's a very, very lonely time. Concerts, going to school conferences, taking a child to the doctor. I mean, there's just so many situations that are very lonely times.
I was the dance school, ballet school mom. I was, the tutu and the hair and the makeup and the classes and sitting out there with the other 25 moms and me. Sitting there, awkward and not really knowing how to engage or not engage, and what to do and how to do it, and there was really no role model for it. There was nobody you could really go to talk to about it, and so the hardest part was after I put her to bed. Okay, so then what am I going to do?
Right.
What am I going to do at this time? And so you can't really have an outside life because you have a child to look after and you have a career to manage. So that becomes a hard place. But yet you offer great insights into words of comfort. How did you find in your season, how did you find solutions to the loneliness factor?
Well, back then we didn't have programs like divorce care and grief share and things that we have now. But I had connected with some friends at a church. And so one of the ladies, and I talked about her in the book, she was a counselor and I was a child care person, early childhood, a lot of experience, a lot of education in that field. So her and I became best friends, and we would just, phone would just ring at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And sometimes we would talk till, 12 or 1. I tell people God created us to be around other people. And you have to be able to talk to somebody about a few of these issues. I remember one time my son was in track, and so he was going to run in a track game in a town about 30 miles from us. So I drove up there, and I saw our section of town over here, because they had all the Broken Arrow, that's where we were from, Broken Arrow jackets on or things. So I see nobody I know, so I climb up the stairs, and I got there late because I had to work, single parents have to work late hours, and I got there late, the meet had already started, and Brian hadn't run yet, and so I'm walking up the steps, and I'm looking for any place to sit, and I see a place over here, so I go, excuse me. I sit down, the lady goes, are you with someone? I was like, no, I'm alone. My son's running in track. Oh, okay. So pretty soon this guy is walking down here and he's got popcorn and soda and she said, is he with you? I was like, no, I'm alone. She did this to me like 3 different times. Finally, I was like, forget it. I got up, went down, and I stood at the fence because I would rather stand alone than be up there alone with people asking me, is he with you? Is he with you? They just couldn't believe I was alone. So I'm kind of with the dads, the opposite scene, standing down here by the track meet, watching my son run track.
Well, you say God sets the lonely in families, that it's not good for the man to be alone. He talks about that in Scripture, that we're built for fellowship. We tend to look at this concept of brokenness. We've labeled it. You're from a broken home, and that there's a certain amount of brokenness in these relationships. But there is such a thing as a healthy single family parent who can declare that their home is not broken.
That was me. My home was not broken.
So, from a perspective, of course, Jesus came to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captives free. So, this was not the design for marriage to fail, or the design, but biblically we do see the male often gone, and a single parenting role takes place, but it's not a single parent home. So there's a difference between that. How do you deal with there's a difference between a single parent home because of divorce, because of death, because of some circumstance of separation. How do you distinguish between a single parent home that is actually a single parent home, or a home that feels like a single parent home because the other parent is not a parenting partner?
I'm not sure. Are you asking me the difference between a broken home and a single parent home, or?
Well, I'm saying husband and wife. Wife is very involved with the children. Father has nothing to do with the kids. She's living as a single.
Oh, okay.
Living as a single person, but married.
Right.
Is there a difference in the dynamic? Are the problems that they face, are the emotions, are the challenges, are they any different for the disengaged multi-parent home than there is for the classical
Yes.
single parent home?
And this is my observation only. All right. But in the home where the two people are married, one is distant, one is doing all the caregiving, those homes are not as healthy as a healthy single parent home, because you're giving the children bad models. So a dad is not involved in the home. That's saying to the little boy, when I grow up, I don't have to be involved with the kids. Or mommy is out all the time, so I'm a little girl. When I grow up, hey, I can do this. I don't have to parent my kids. The husband will. So these are not good models for children. And usually in those types of homes, not every time, but usually there's a lot of conflict going on in the home too. And like, what, you're going out again tonight? How can you go every night and leave me with these kids alone? So imagine how a child feels like, well, nobody loves me in this home because they don't want to stay with me. But in a single parent home, you're parenting alone. You have time. I tell people I gave my kids more attention once I got over the hump. I was a broken single parent. I mean, a broken parent for a long time, till I finally grasped what I was supposed to be doing, and God directed me in that sense. So, but when I finally got over that hump, I became a better single parent. So I had time to give to my children. I didn't have to share dinner time with another person. At that moment, I became everything to my children, and they became everything to me. And then we would watch TV together, or we would do there would be no, well, I'm not going to do that, or I don't want to do that, because I was the only parent in the home. And when we had devotion time in the morning, there was no, well, I think that's ridiculous, because I was the only parent in the home, and what I said went. So I think that's a huge difference. And I think children, and some research shows this, that children in a single parent home can grow up to be more emotionally, spiritually healthy than kids in a dysfunctional home where there are two parents.
Well, what a sad commentary on what we've done to the classic family construct that God gave us, which are engaged in active parenting, fathers teaching their sons how to be parents raising boys to be men, and parents raising girls to be women, and a future generation of husbands and wives, and future generations of mothers and fathers based on the examples that they've been given during their upbringing, that short 18-year period of stewardship that we all are given. We're talking with Linda Ransom Jacobs, author of the new book, The Single Parent, Confident and Successful. Improve your child's behavior, negotiate boundaries, graciously seek and accept help, trust God in the journey. She's the creator of the Divorce Care for Kids program. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue in our discussion about the single parent dynamic and how you, as a single parent, can become confident and successful. We'll be right back. Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham, or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Linda Ranson Jacobs, author of the new book, The Single Parent, Confident and Successful. She's the creator of the Divorce Care for Kids program and tremendous personal insight and experience in both counseling and living out the life of a single parent. Linda, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Linda, when we look at this parenting paradigm, we want to raise our children with the right kind of role models, but a single mom can be a role model as a good mom, but a single mom can't be a role model as a good dad. Okay, just not genetically in our makeup to be able to do that. I could be a role model to my daughter of what a good dad would be like, and hopefully that she would be attracted to her husband, who would be an attentive father, but it wasn't really raising her to be a dad. So, you know, that's something I had to go get help with connecting her with friends and family. What role should the church play? What part should the youth pastor in these situations play in this, the senior pastor for that matter? What is the church's, in your mind, their responsibility in assisting in this dynamic where there is a single parent situation for whatever the reason is?
Well, I think the church's first role should be get the single parents to the church. Most single parents don't attend church. Maybe they did. They became a single parent. They're embarrassed. They don't have time. The list goes on and on. So I think the first role is reaching out to the single parent. And that can be done through various programs. But getting the single parent in the church is important. And then welcoming them into the single parents and making the church aware of single parents. I remember a friend of mine said when she came to visit our church, she hadn't even fully gotten out of her car yet, and she had just been divorced and was feeling very intimidated, and she was forcing herself to go to church this Sunday. And she said, if one person had said any negative word to me, I would have gone in my car and left. But she was getting out of her car, and one of the older ladies in the church said, oh, hello, are you new here today? She said, yes. She said, is your husband with you? She said, no, I'm not married. She goes, me neither. Come with me. And it wasn't her age. She was a much older lady, but she got her into the church, made her feel so welcome. That started in the parking lot. That was because the pastor had educated his church family on visitors coming, and this lady had been a single parent herself. That was God's design. So I think a lot of prayer from the senior pastors. If there's a prayer team, I think the prayer team needs to be praying for single parents to come into the church, and then help them mentor these children. Several times, and I was very blessed with my children. They didn't have a lot of contact with their dad, and so we had a neighbor man that he just was very friendly. His son was a little bit younger than my son. He was a good role model. We had a couple at our church that had a child the same age as Brian, and so there were certain, like almost every Sunday that Brian was with me, he went over to this family's house for the afternoon, and I knew certain holidays, 4th of July and New Year's Eve, that Brian would be with his family because they just celebrate a certain way. And so my son doesn't even realize it, but that man being in a married life made a tremendous impact on him. And there were other men in his life that the Lord provided that made a tremendous impact on him. I do want to tell you one story, though. We had left our church because it was a small church and I was the only divorced person. And we went to a larger church that had a single parent ministry. And so Brian was about 13 at this time. And so one weekday, him and I were out in the backyard working, and we hear a car driving the driveway, and he looks and goes, oh, it's my Sunday school teacher. Mom, in all the time that Dad's been gone since I was 7 years old, do you know no Sunday school teacher has ever visited me? And I was fully aware of that. And so the young man comes around, and we're sitting on the back patio, and we're all talking and when we would talk for quite a while, and then something came up about single parent homes. I was getting ready to do a single parent class, I think is what it was. And this young man without realizing, said, "Those kids from broken homes just drive me crazy. They ruin my Sunday school class." And I looked over, and my son had just disappeared from the conversation. That hurt him deeply. And I was just aghast. I said, "Do you not realize you're sitting on the back porch of a single parent home?" He goes, "Oh, this is a broken home." No, no, this is a single parent home. He said, "Well, I wonder why Brian only came every other Sunday." Oh my gosh, get a clue. If the child only comes every Sunday, check into why they're only coming every so often. You might learn more about the child. So, I could never pull my child back into that church. He went because I was a mother and because I said, "You're going on Sunday morning." But he wouldn't go any other time. But you understand, he was hurt, and I understood. So later on, an opportunity came for me to go to a small church and play the piano. I'm a musician, so I took my son and we went. And after a few weeks, they announced the father-son fishing trip. And I was like, "Oh, no, Brian wasn't with me." I was like, "Oh, how am I going to get through this?" So one of the guys came up afterwards and he goes, "Hey, is Brian coming to the father-son fishing trip?" And I was like, "Oh, I guess you know, no, Brian's dad left." He goes, "Oh, I guess you don't know. I only have 3 daughters. My wife left and I need a son." I was like, "Thank you, Jesus." I said, "Well, call Brian tonight and talk to him." So that happened, and Brian went on this fishing trip, changed his outlook. Just this small little group of men going fishing and giving him a tent and a fishing pole, letting him stay up all night long, and all those things. It was only a 24-hour deal, but what a difference it made. And so, from my own personal experience, we have to reach out to these kids. So, if you're a pastor, or if you're a youth minister, figure out a way to reach out and draw those children in and hook them up with somebody that can mentor them. Even older couples make great mentors for some of these teen kids because they don't have access to their grandparents necessarily with our world that we have today. And I know in our church, my husband and I have a teen that we've connected with, and he'll call me, "Miss Lynn, I got a problem. Can I talk to you? You have time to talk to me?" Because he doesn't have any access to his grandparents, and he knows that we love him so much. And there's a tenderness about grandparent type people toward these children.
It's interesting. I think that the greatest life lessons that I learned were from my grandfather. And so this concept of mentoring is something that I think that anyone, of course, can do to put themselves out there. I think it's the role of the church to connect, and you need to connect. It's like plugging. I go to Israel every year, and you have to have a different electrical adapter. You can't plug your appliance. You can't plug your regular plug into the wall. You have to have an adapter. So you have to have the appropriate adapter. So you can't plug in to something that doesn't fit. So we try to make these programs. We have these large youth gatherings, and we throw all the kids together, but all the kids don't have the same needs, and all the kids don't have the same relationships and the connections. And there are, even within the church, maybe even especially within the church, there are cliques, there are groups which form, and being the odd man out, the odd girl out, being the one that doesn't have the same scenario, can't tell the same stories about the trip they made with their mom, or the trip they made with their dad, or what they did on family vacation, or when they tell the story, there's always a missing component. They feel left out, so it's easy to be cut out of the pack, like in the Wild Kingdom, to be the wounded one, and then put yourself in a position to be. You're already wounded, now you're in a position to be further wounded. And we have a responsibility to make sure that we're plugging people into something that fits, a narrative that fits.
Worst Care for Kids, it's for elementary age children. And when I created it, people thought it was absolutely crazy, but I knew it would work. And that was the fact that we put all ages in the same group. We put kindergarten in the same group with fifth graders. And the reason behind that is, first of all, many of these children are going to end up in a blended family. So while you were the youngest in one family, you might be the oldest in this next family. And you need to learn to be around kids of other ages. And then the other thing is we create family in DC4K, and these kids begin to take care of each other. So the older kids will help the younger child. The younger child will lean into the older child. So in my church, we do the DC4K for elementary, and then we do a teen program. It's called Journey Through the Eyes of Divorce, Journey Through the Eyes of Child by Krista Smith. And we do the same thing. We put all the teenagers from, well, actually we put tweens in there too, because they need to be around other kids who are experiencing what they are, because they're not around those kids in Sunday school. They can't tell those stories in a Bible study class or a teen group, but they can tell them in the teens of divorce group. So you're right, and I think we do these kids I don't think we give them appropriate experiences when we lump them all into a large group, and they can't identify with these other kids. My daughter said one time when we were in a small church, she said, Mom, the preacher only preaches about two-parent families. We don't fit in that category. And she was a young teenager. She figured that out pretty quickly, and we didn't fit in those stories. The pastor I'm under now, anytime he mentions family, he mentions single-parent family too. So he's really good to be educated, and you just feel different in a church like that. So it would only take a few little comments from the pastor to help single parents feel welcomed in that church. And when you mention family, you mention all kinds of families. I say to pastors, you show me in the Bible a two-parent family on a corner lot in the suburb with 1.5 kids, because those stories are not in the Bible. The Bible's all full of broken families and families taken into slavery and wives brought over here and children over here. I mean, that's the stories in the Bible. And yet we seem to only want the two-parent families pulled into our churches. So those are just some things we need to educate pastors on and church leaders.
Jacob, 12 sons, 4 mothers. It's quite an interesting family dynamic.
Right.
And at any given time, there were only 11 of them together, because, of course, Joseph was gone and then Benjamin was born. So we look at this very odd family dynamic of 4 wives, 12 sons, and what ultimately becomes the seed line of the Messiah, the seed line of the priesthood. Very important players in the life and times of every believer.
Right.
For without that, there would be no Jesus, there would be no lineage, there would be no bloodline. And so it becomes incredibly important for us to understand that, Joseph was set apart from his family and thrown into a lot of tumult, but God orchestrated, because of that separation, that we were down to now 71 of us left on the face of the earth. That's extinction. That is on the verge of extinction. And what God can do with a separated, single, broken, divided, whatever you want to call it, in that unusual set of circumstances, it's not exclusive to the perfect Donna Reed and Leave It to Beaver kind of family image that you and I grew up with on the television, where the family sat quietly together at the dinner table and talked about their day. That wasn't necessarily the case.
So also stuck to his moral convictions, which we have a lot of our single parents today. They don't stick to their moral convictions. So that's a tremendous story for single parents.
It's very interesting. The single parent dynamic, in your opinion, when does that change? For example, I know someone who's been a single parent and they have a 23-year-old still at home, working full-time, still at home, not a entitled millennial, but building savings. This was a kind of a a structured. This is the way we're going to help you to get to be able, instead of go throw it away on rent, to be able to afford a down payment, to make a life for yourself, and it's just the two of us, so we're going to do it this way. So how does that change? How does the dynamic change? Is that still a single parent home, or is that kind of a different model?
I think if the child is over 21, it's no longer a single parent home. It's a different model. A single parent home, the parent, mother or father, still takes care of the child. Now, in my home, when my children both of them turned 18 before they went to high school, before they were senior in high school. And at that point, when they turned 18, I think my home went from being a single parent home to more of a home where the two adults lived in the home. For example, I started early on with goals I wanted for my children. One of them was to work and blah, blah, blah. Well, one of my goals was for them to no longer have a curfew when they were in their senior in high school. So I didn't just wait till September 1st so you have no more curfew. We started when they were 15 and 16 with curfews. So then when they became a senior in high school, they no longer had a curfew. However, we were two adults that lived in the home, and I said, I'll always let you know where I am and approximately when I'll be home. I expect the same from you. And I tell my kids, as long as they were working, going to college, I wouldn't charge them rent. But if they didn't go to college, then they would start paying rent in my home. So my kids became adults early on, and they're very functional, high, successful adults today. So I think a 21, 22-year-old, if they're working, they're going to school, they have their own life, then it's no longer single-parent home. It's adults living together, cooperating. It's a team. But if you have the child who's not working, who's totally dependent on the single parent, has no boundaries, doesn't know how to set boundaries, and is on the electronic games till 1 or 2 in the morning, that's a dysfunctional single-parent home.
And that brings up an area of boundaries and where do you set them? How do you set them? And there's no reinforcement for it in a single parent home. There's nobody to back you up, so
right.
It becomes if it's not handled properly, it becomes a confrontation as opposed to a learning opportunity, if you will. How do you approach that? What is some of your counsel in that area?
When I'm working with single parents, most of them are tired, frustrated because they have long hours, they're trying to survive, they're parenting. Every responsibility in the home is yours, mowing the yard, laundry, everything. So I think you have to learn to dole out those responsibilities to the kids, or you're going to be so exhausted you can't parent. You can't set boundaries. So the children have to take over some of that role. And then one thing single parents tend to do is just scream and yell. And it's like when they go to the grocery store. Now, we're not buying anything but these groceries. And then it's like, Mommy, can I have this? Can I have this? No. And then I was like, okay, well, it's the last time I'm buying you something. Don't ever ask for me anything again. Of course, we just trained them to ask for something again. So single parents have got to have some time to themselves. I'd say they have to have time with the Lord. And then they need to be able to set their goals early on. I don't care if you have a 3-year-old in your home, there needs to be some goals for that child that they contribute to them. When a child contributes to a home, then they take ownership of belonging in that home. So you have a family where the single mom or the single dad does all the work. The child has no respect for that parent, and they don't feel like they belong in that home. But if a 3-year-old has to take her laundry to the laundry room, and she has to set the table every night, that's contributing to the home. A 12-year-old boy needs to be taking the trash out to the curb, mowing the yard, or weed eating, or contributing somehow, and so does the daughter. So think as long as these parents help their children contribute, then you have a relationship with your child, then you can set boundaries. I call it step back parenting. When something happened, I would have to step back at least 24 hours and think about it, unless it was a dangerous situation like the child's running in the street or something.
Right.
But step back, give yourself permission to say, I'm the only parent, I've got to pray about this, I'm going to make it, and say to your child, I'm going to take 24 hours to think about this, then I'll come back to you and we'll talk about it. That gives you time to calm down a little bit. So I think that's creating a healthy single parent home.
Do you find that there is still a certain stigma for divorced women, different standard than for divorced men? I don't think anybody really thinks about asking a man to usher and weighs in his marital status. But if you ask a woman to serve, they tend to discuss or maybe are more probative, or not ask them to serve because they notice that they're only there by themselves with their children and there is no man.
I think it depends on the church, and not denomination, but the church and the pastor in charge. Makes a huge difference. And so if you come to our church right now, I can show you people who are single parents or people who used to be single parents that went through divorce care. And when I led divorce care and a single parenting class, and I go, that one and that one and that usher and that choir member and that keyboard player. And so my goal in bringing a single parent into the church, if they don't know Christ as personal Savior, that's the first goal. The second goal is to get them involved in the church. So once they do know Christ, it's the same as like with a child. When you don't contribute, you don't feel like you belong. It's the same for a single parent in the church. And I know some pastors go, well, single parents just don't have any income. Oh, excuse me. I know single parents that are millionaires. They are the foundation, financial foundation for many churches. So women and men, I just think it depends on the pastor and how the church elders have trained their leaders and trained the people in their church.
Yeah, I don't see any restriction on spiritual gifts for a different category for single parents or for those that are married or divorced. It's certainly you don't want you want to give people time to heal, but giving them time to heal and then helping them turn the corner from healing to whole is a process, and that is a place where if the church is not a hospital or that can provide the healing and the process from healing to wholeness, then is it really fulfilling the mandate of being the hands and feet of the Messiah and taking care of, and we tend to look at this statement in Scripture, pure religion is taking care of widows and orphans. That is not just in the natural, that's a spirit as well.
Right.
There is an orphan spirit. There is a widow's spirit. And children of a single-parent home may have an orphan spirit that needs to be dealt with, that they do belong, that they are wanted, that they are not rejected, that they were not the cause of their family's breakup. And that's something that I think is a common theme, that if you spend time with some of the children of divorce, you'll find that they do carry a certain weight of responsibility, thinking that, well, if I would have just been a better daughter, if I had been a better son, if I had just not had that one argument with him, or had I not done this one thing, then maybe they'd still be together, that they do carry somewhat of that burden, and we need to get closer to them. And these are the kind of things you talk about in the book. You talk about supporting children when you have them part-time. You talk about learning to accept other people into your child's life, two moms, having somebody to help out, another family that's got a child of the same age. And so mentoring relationships. A tremendous resource, Linda Ransom Jacobs, author of The Single Parent, Confident and Successful. This book will help you improve your child's behavior, negotiate boundaries, graciously seek and accept help, trusting God in the journey from the Creator. A Divorce Care for Kids program, a new resource, one that fills a very important need in the single parent home. Linda Jacobs, thank you for sharing this incredible story with us here on Revealing the Truth.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.